Smoke curled skyward like a black serpent, twisting against the blood-orange sky. The desert was silent save for the crackling of fire and the low groan of burning wood. Flames licked greedily at the wheels of the old wagon, which sat half-toppled on a patch of scorched earth. Tied to its side, bound with coarse hemp rope, was Rourke McAllister, a man who had once been known for his aim but more recently for his silence. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the veins on his neck bulged. His skin blistered under the radiating heat, his clothes already singed at the edges. Just a few feet away, also bound, were his 2 children. Maeve, 8 years old and already dust-covered and trembling, whimpered against the gag in her mouth. Wesley, 10, stared wide-eyed at the flames, sweat and soot streaking his face. He blinked furiously as though he could will the smoke from his eyes, or the fire from reaching his little sister's toes. "You hear that?" a voice called, rough and taunting. "That's the sound of your stubbornness, McAllister." Jedediah Crane stepped into view, spurs jangling with each step. His coat flared behind him like a preacher's robe, though the man wore sin on his skin like a second layer. He grinned with all the warmth of a rattlesnake. Could have handed it all over nice and easy. But no. Had to make it hard. Thought that quiet little ranch of yours could stay untouched while the rest of the West burns. Rourke didn't answer. He focused on his breathing, slow and even. There wasn't enough slack in the ropes to shift. His wrists bled from trying. Still, he measured each breath like it might be his last. There was no dignity in panic. His father had taught him that long ago. Crane crouched beside Wesley and Maeve. The boy shifted in his bonds, trying to get between the outlaw and his sister. Jedediah leaned in close. "Gutsy little thing," he muttered. "Bet you get that from your mother." Maeve whimpered louder. Rourke flinched. His voice cracked the air, dry and gravelly. "Leave them." Crane stood, smiling wide. "Now you find your voice. Bit late, don't you think?" The wind kicked up dust and ash, swirling it around the dying light of day. Overhead, a buzzard circled, black wings slicing the sky. The fire caught the rear wheel of the wagon, sending a fresh burst of flame racing up the sideboards. The ropes sizzled where they met the wood. "Reckon you'll burn before they do," Crane said, spitting into the dirt. "Not that it matters. This land won't remember your name. It'll remember mine." He turned, walking back toward his horse. "Let the fire finish what I started," he called to his men. "We ride at dawn." The gang, 6 dust-streaked killers, laughed as they mounted. One paused, watching Rourke with something close to pity in his eyes, then kicked his horse and rode after the others. As their hoofbeats faded, silence returned, except for the roar of the fire and the muffled cries of Maeve. Rourke's arms ached with a dull, pounding pain. He twisted his wrists again. Skin tore. He didn't stop. "Wes," he rasped. You hold her hand. You don't let go, all right?" The boy nodded, blinking tears into the wind. His fingers reached blindly across the gap between them, finding Maeve's. She clutched back like a drowning child to driftwood. The fire leapt higher, catching the edge of the tarp above them. Smoke poured thick and dark. Rourke coughed, every breath a dagger. His vision blurred. He thought of Hannah. Her hair always smelled like wild sage. The way she'd sit on the porch and hum when the wind passed through the canyon. She died giving birth to Maeve. He hadn't picked up his rifle since that day. Now, death was back at his doorstep, not as a shadow but as fire and rope and vengeance. A sound broke the silence. It was soft, almost inaudible at first. A hoof. Then another. Not a gallop. No outlaw would return this soon. This was something else. The steady, cautious rhythm of a single horse descending a slope. Wesley turned his head toward the ridgeline. "Pa," he whispered, "someone's there." Rourke raised his head, coughing hard. Through the smoke and tears he saw a silhouette. Atop a painted horse stood a woman, dark hair braided tight, wrapped in a red shawl, bow strung across her back. Her face was painted with ash and ochre, the symbols unfamiliar but haunting. Her eyes locked onto the wagon. Then, without a word, she dismounted. She moved like wind, low and quiet, skirting the edge of the fire. Rourke blinked again, uncertain if she was real. She was a ghost in the smoke, a whisper of motion. Maeve gasped as the woman appeared behind her. Sadara placed a hand on the child's shoulder and held a finger to her lips. Calm spread over Maeve's face like a blanket, despite the flames. With a small obsidian knife, Sadara sliced through the rope binding the girl. Then Wesley. Then Rourke. Each cut was clean and quick. The heat made her squint, but she didn't flinch. Her skin glistened with sweat and resolve. Rourke sagged forward as the ropes gave way. He fell to his knees in the dirt, coughing violently. He grabbed Maeve and pulled her close. "Who?" he croaked. "No time," Sadara said. Her voice was low but firm, like the stone walls of the canyon. "We must go. Now." She led them away from the wagon, guiding them behind a boulder as the flames consumed what was left. The sky had darkened fully now, stars blinking into view one by one like watchful eyes. Behind them, the fire collapsed the wagon in on itself, sending up a final burst of sparks. Sadara didn't look back. Neither did Rourke. He couldn't. Not yet. They moved quietly, the three of them trailing behind their mysterious savior. Wesley's hand stayed on his sister's back, protective. Rourke limped, muscles screaming. Sadara stopped only once at the edge of a shallow arroyo. "There is a cave," she said, pointing. "We rest. Then we move with the dawn." Rourke finally met her eyes. "Why did you help us?" She stared back at him for a long moment. "Because someone once watched my family burn," she said, "and did nothing." He understood then that she was not there for glory. She wasn't an angel or a warrior. She was something deeper, a wound walking on two legs just like him. Maeve curled beside him, exhausted. Wesley watched Sadara build a small fire from dried sagebrush, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and awe. And Rourke, quiet as ever, leaned against the cool stone of the cave wall. He listened to the wind. He thought of fire. And for the first time in a long while he thought he might survive the night. But he knew, deep in his gut, that Crane wouldn't let go so easily. Not until one of them was dead. The first rays of morning sun sliced through the mouth of the cave, streaking light across the dirt floor and catching the edge of Rourke's boot. He sat with his back to the stone wall, eyes wide open, having slept not a moment. His rifle lay across his lap, a weapon untouched for nearly a decade, now cleaned and loaded. Wesley and Maeve were still asleep, curled together beneath a blanket of buffalo hide Sadara had brought from her horse. Their breathing was soft, shallow. He envied them that. Sadara stood near the entrance, silent as ever, her profile framed by the orange light. She hadn't spoken much during the night. Not about herself. Not about why she had wandered into the desert alone. Not even about how she knew to come. But Rourke wasn't ready to ask questions. Not yet. There were answers he feared more than silence. "What's your plan?" he asked finally, voice still rough. She didn't turn to him. "Your children are alive. That is the plan." "That ain't a plan. That's a hope." She glanced back now, something sharp in her gaze. "And what did hope give you before I found you tied to a pyre?" He said nothing. The words stung, but only because they rang true. She crouched near the fire and began preparing a simple meal, cornmeal wrapped in leaves cooked over coals. Her hands moved with precision. Rourke studied her. There was no nervousness, no wasted motion. Everything she did was survival turned ritual. "You used to fight," he said. "I used to bleed," she replied flatly. "Same difference." Maeve stirred then, letting out a small groan and sitting up slowly. Her hair stuck up in wild tangles, eyes swollen from crying the night before. She looked around, trying to remember where she was. "Pa." Rourke stood and knelt beside her. "I'm here, baby." She climbed into his arms without a word. He held her tight, tighter than he meant to. She didn't protest. Wesley woke moments later, more cautious. He looked toward Sadara first, like he'd already decided she was the one they should be paying attention to. "We can't go back home, can we?" he asked. "No," Rourke said. "Not yet." "Then what?" Sadara spoke before Rourke could. "Crane will come back. For what he didn't finish." "He's not the type to forget," Rourke muttered. She nodded. "That gives us time. A few hours, maybe a day." He frowned. "Not much." "Enough." The breakfast was meager, but the children ate with the appetite of those who had seen death close and decided they weren't ready for it. Rourke forced it down. Every bite tasted like ash. As they packed up, Sadara handed Wesley a small dagger. "You'll keep this," she said. Wesley took it, brow furrowed. "I don't know how to use it." "You'll learn." Maeve looked up at her father. "Pa, is she gonna keep us safe?" Rourke hesitated. She already did. As the sun rose higher, they made their way north, following Sadara's lead. She moved as if the desert whispered secrets to her, navigating through canyons and dry riverbeds that Rourke barely remembered, though he'd lived in the area his whole life. The landscape shimmered with heat, distant rocks blurring like ghosts in the distance. They walked for hours. Rourke carried Maeve when she tired, her small arms wrapped around his neck. Wesley pushed on, silent, dagger tucked into his belt. Occasionally, Sadara would stop and listen. She didn't say what she heard, but her posture would change, tense, alert. Then she'd move again, quicker, more focused. Midday found them near a cluster of sun-scorched rock formations. Sadara led them into a narrow crevice between two boulders, revealing a hidden space shaded and cool. She knelt, brushing away sand to reveal a shallow cache, jerky, dried berries, a rolled blanket, a pouch of water. "You hid this?" Rourke asked. "Years ago." He shook his head. "You always prepare for war?" She looked at him then, and something passed between them. Recognition. Pain perhaps. Maybe guilt. A bond carved not from affection, but from loss. "Yes," she said. "Because war always finds those who stop fighting." Rourke didn't reply. He watched his children nibble at the jerky and imagined them safe. Somewhere with green fields and quiet nights. Somewhere this outlaw Crane had never touched. Sadara sat across from him, watching him watch them. "You think you can hide them forever?" she asked softly. "No. But I can stop him." "You tried that already. And he burned your life down for it." Rourke looked away, jaw tightening. "I let him come. I turned the other cheek too many times. And now you want vengeance." "I want peace." She tilted her head. "Peace doesn't come without a cost." He met her gaze. "Then I'll pay it." A shadow passed overhead. They both looked up, eyes narrowing. 3 riders crested the ridge above, too far to identify but close enough to be a problem. Rourke reached for his rifle. Sadara held up a hand. "They don't know we're here," she whispered. "Don't move." They crouched in silence, breath caught in their throats. Wesley gripped Maeve's hand. One of the riders paused, scanning the terrain. The other 2 moved on. After a minute, the third followed. When the sound of hooves faded, Rourke exhaled. Sadara didn't move. "They're looking for us," she said. "Crane's dogs." "I figured. We can't keep running. They'll catch our scent sooner or later." "Then we don't run," Rourke said. "We make a stand." Her eyes narrowed. "Where?" "My father's cabin. Southridge. Been abandoned 10 years. Still got a root cellar. Smokehouse. Stone foundation." She nodded slowly. "That's something." "You help me fortify it," he said. "I'll keep them off." "And the children?" "I'll get them out first. Through the canyon pass." "You ride with them?" She shook her head. "No. I stay. I fight. You already saved us once. I won't ask you to die for us." "You didn't ask," she said quietly. "I chose." He stared at her, unsure what to say. In her eyes was something deeper than duty, something he recognized in himself. A wound that never closed. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the stone. The children had dozed off again, lulled by the warmth and the quiet. Rourke stood, adjusting the rifle strap across his back. "Then we ride at dusk," he said. "Tonight we get ready." Sadara stood beside him. "And tomorrow?" He didn't answer right away. He watched the horizon where the riders had vanished. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we fight like we have nothing left to lose." And as the sun bled into the desert, Rourke McAllister knew that the man he had been, the quiet rancher, the widower who buried his rifle with his grief, was gone. What rose from those ashes now was something else entirely. And Crane had no idea what kind of fire he'd started. The sun had dipped low, painting the canyon walls in hues of crimson and gold as Rourke guided his horse up the slope. Wesley clung behind him, arms wrapped around his father's waist, while Maeve rode in front of Sadara, tucked safely beneath her shawl. The girl's head rested against Sadara's chest, her eyes heavy, but not from exhaustion. She was retreating inward, the way children do when the world around them becomes too sharp. The ridge came into view, and with it, the silhouette of the old McAllister cabin, a squat, weathered structure built of timber and stone. The roof sagged at the edges and the shutters had long since rotted off, but it stood. Rourke reined in his horse at the edge of the clearing and stared at it. For a moment no one spoke. Wesley broke the silence. "You used to live here?" Rourke nodded. "Built it with my pa when I was a boy. We hunted elk from that porch. Snow would pile high against the east wall. Wolves circle some nights, but we never had to shoot 'em." Wesley squinted at the door. "Looks like it could fall over." Rourke smiled faintly. "It won't. Not till we're good and gone." They dismounted, leading the horses toward a half-collapsed lean-to that had once been a tack shed. Rourke moved with a purpose that hadn't been in him for years. The man who had let his gun gather dust was gone. In his place was someone who remembered how to hammer, to dig, to sharpen blades against stone. "Root cellar's still there," he said, kneeling and brushing back weeds to reveal a heavy wooden hatch. It groaned as he pulled it open. The cool air rose up like breath from the earth. "We'll stash food, water, ammo down here," he said. "If the fight turns bad, this is where you go." "I'm not hiding in a hole," Wesley muttered. "You will if I say so," Rourke snapped, harsher than he meant. Then he softened. "We fight smart, not proud." Sadara walked the perimeter, her eyes scanning every hill, every patch of scrub. "We'll need a lookout. There's high ground to the south." "I'll take first watch," Rourke offered. "No. You'll teach your son how to shoot." Wesley's head jerked up. "Really?" Rourke hesitated. "He's just a boy." Sadara's gaze didn't waver. So was Crane. Once. Rourke looked down at his hands, calloused, cracked, dirty. He wondered how different his son's life would be if the world hadn't forced their hands. But there was no luxury of innocence anymore. Not when death rode with a name. "All right," he said. "Let's get started." They worked through the night. Rourke and Wesley patched the cabin's weak points, stacking stones against the lower walls, nailing shutters fashioned from scrap wood. Sadara set traps along the ridge, tripwires strung with broken glass, warning bells made from scavenged tin. The children fetched water from the nearby creek, carried small bundles of firewood, did what they could to help. By dawn, the cabin looked less like a ruin and more like a fortress. Inside, Rourke showed Wesley how to handle the rifle. He walked him through each motion: load, aim, breathe, squeeze. They practiced in the clearing, Wesley hitting a knot in a stump 3 out of 5 times. He didn't smile. He just nodded each time, jaw tight with focus. Rourke recognized the look. It was the same one he'd worn the first time he hunted deer with his father. Later, Sadara taught Maeve how to move silently. How to step lightly, how to listen with more than ears. She turned the little girl's fear into something else. Awareness, intent. Maeve still clung to her father at night, but by the second morning she no longer whimpered in her sleep. On the third day, Sadara returned from scouting with a bloodied feather tucked behind her ear. "They're close," she said, tossing a bent horseshoe onto the table. 3 miles. Maybe less. Saw one of Crane's men pissin' on a sycamore like he owned it. Rourke stood still, the muscle in his jaw ticking. "Then this is it." Sadara didn't nod, didn't speak. But she reached for her bow and began checking each arrow's fletching. They laid their traps. Poured oil near the tree line. Buried spikes beneath the sand at the trail's mouth. Rourke planted himself near the broken chimney with the rifle. Sadara took the south ridge with her bow. Wesley watched from the loft, 2 rounds and a signal mirror in his pocket. Maeve sat with a satchel packed and the cellar door unlatched. The sun rose slow, heavy with promise. Then came the hooves. Dust curled on the horizon like smoke from a bad dream. 7 riders, one at the front cloaked in black, hat pulled low. Even from a distance, Rourke knew the man by the way he sat his horse, like a vulture on a post, waiting for the dead to quiet down. "Crane." He stopped just past the treeline, scanning the cabin. "McAllister," he bellowed. "Heard you were still breathing. Thought maybe the fire wasn't hot enough." Rourke stepped out onto the porch, rifle resting on the banister. He didn't shout. Didn't raise his voice. Just said, "You should have made sure." Crane laughed. "Now that's more like it. Thought maybe you'd gone soft on me." His men chuckled behind him. One dismounted, stepping forward. He tripped the wire. Glass shattered. A shot rang out. Rourke didn't wait. He fired again, hitting the man square in the thigh. He went down screaming. Chaos erupted. Crane's men fanned out. 2 tried to flank the cabin's east side but stumbled into the spike pit, howling. One crawled away with a jagged sliver of wood sticking out of his leg. Another dove for cover, only to catch Sadara's arrow through the shoulder, pinning him to a pine. Crane didn't flinch. He dismounted slowly, drawing his revolver, eyes locked on Rourke. Rourke ducked as bullets peppered the cabin walls. He reloaded, breathed, fired again. Wesley shouted from above. "Left side. 2 of them." Rourke turned, just in time to see a shadow dart around the corner. He moved fast, pushing out the door and circling wide. He fired twice. Once missed, once didn't. The second man dropped, clutching his gut. Inside, Maeve slammed the cellar hatch shut and pulled the latch tight. The fight burned like dry timber, fast, hot, wild. Then silence. Smoke drifted. 2 men lay groaning. One was still. Another had run. Sadara stood over a 5th, blood dripping from her blade. Wesley emerged, face pale but dry-eyed. Only Crane remained. He stood at the edge of the porch, hat in hand, blood trickling from a cut across his brow. Rourke stepped out slowly, rifle raised. Crane smiled. "Hell of a fight, McAllister." "You always talk too much," Rourke said. Crane drew. But Rourke was faster. The shot echoed through the trees. Crane staggered, dropped to his knees, eyes wide in disbelief. He fell sideways, landing in the dust with his mouth open and a single word caught in his throat. Silence again. Sadara stepped forward. Is it over? Rourke lowered the rifle. Not yet. But something had changed. Not just in the clearing. Not just in the dirt now soaked with blood. But in him. In the boy on the porch. And in the girl waiting quietly in the root cellar, stronger than she had been 3 days before. They had fought like they had nothing left to lose. And somehow they'd won. But morning had only just begun. The wind came colder that night, brushing through the pines like a whisper from another world. Rourke sat on the cabin steps with his rifle across his knees, staring out at the darkness that swallowed the land. The fire in the pit had long gone to embers, casting dull orange light across the blood-stained dirt. The bodies were buried, shallow and quick, marked only by stones. There was no ceremony. No words. Only silence. Inside, Maeve slept curled against Sadara, her breathing soft and even. Wesley sat near the hearth, legs drawn to his chest, staring into the ashes like they might offer him some kind of understanding. He hadn't spoken much since the shootout and Rourke didn't push. Boys didn't cry the way girls did. Boys turned their pain inward until it turned into something else. You think he was the last of him? Wesley finally asked, eyes still on the fire. No, Rourke said quietly. Men like Crane always leave someone worse behind. Wesley nodded as if he'd already known. Sadara emerged from the shadows then, stepping onto the porch without a sound. Her face was unreadable, but Rourke could see the weight in her shoulders. Killing left a mark on everyone, even those who wore their scars well. You're bleeding, she said, gesturing toward his left arm. Rourke looked down. The graze from earlier had reopened, soaking the sleeve dark red. He hadn't noticed. He'd stopped feeling much of anything since the last bullet flew. Just a scratch, he muttered. Let me see it. He hesitated, then unbuttoned the cuff and rolled the sleeve back. She knelt beside him, pulling a cloth from her belt, dipping it in the water basin. Her hands were steady. Every movement precise. I don't know how you do it, he said. Do what? Stay so calm. After all this. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed the cloth to his wound, wiping away the dried blood. You think calm means I'm not feeling it? No. I think you've just learned to hide it better than most. That made her pause. She met his eyes for the first time in hours. There's nothing noble about surviving, she said. It just means you keep waking up. Whether you want to or not. He nodded slowly. The truth of it landed hard. Inside, Wesley stirred, pulling his blanket tighter. He glanced toward them, then back to the hearth. He's different now, Sadara said, nodding toward the boy. He's not a child anymore, Rourke replied. No, she said. But he isn't a man yet either. He's standing on the edge. What you do now, it decides which way he falls. That truth dug deeper than any bullet ever could. Rourke had been the same age when his own father first handed him a rifle. He'd made choices. Some good. Some that still haunted him. But never once had he been asked to choose between vengeance and mercy. Not like Wesley had. I'll take him to Dry Creek tomorrow, Rourke said. They've got a sheriff. Maybe he'll take what's left of Crane's men. Sadara didn't argue. And after that? I don't know, he admitted. We can't go back to the ranch. Too many ghosts. She stood, folding the cloth and slipping it back into her pouch. Then you find somewhere new. Not for you. For them. I don't even know what that looks like anymore. She stepped back into the doorway, looking down at him. It looks like a place where they don't flinch at gunshots. Where the ground ain't soaked with memory. You find that, you stay. And you? He asked. What'll you do? I don't stay anywhere long, she said. He almost asked her to stay. The words pressed against the back of his throat, but he swallowed them. He couldn't ask that of her. Not after all she'd done. She vanished into the cabin again, leaving him alone with the stars. The sky stretched wide and dark above him, pricked with thousands of lights that seemed impossibly distant. Somewhere out there, men rode with Crane's name on their lips and fire in their eyes. But for now the world was quiet. The next morning he saddled the horses and loaded what supplies they had left. Wesley stood beside him, strapped with the dagger Sadara had given him. The boy didn't speak, just handed him the canteen without a word. Maeve hugged Sadara fiercely, tears streaking her cheeks. Sadara hugged her back with one arm, whispering something Rourke couldn't hear. I'll ride ahead, Sadara said. Make sure the road's clear. Dry Creek's a half day if we push hard. Rourke nodded. Thank you. She didn't say goodbye. Just turned her horse toward the hills and rode off without looking back. They reached Dry Creek as the sun touched its highest point. The town was dust and sweat, tin-roofed buildings baked beneath the July heat. A single saloon, a blacksmith, and a squat jailhouse made up the core. People turned to watch them ride in, blood-stained clothes, wild eyes, a man carrying too much weight, and two children who had already seen too much. The sheriff met them at the edge of town, hand resting on his pistol but eyes full of wariness, not aggression. "You look like hell," he said flatly. "We brought worse with us," Rourke replied. They handed over the names, what few details they could offer. The sheriff scribbled it all down, shaking his head. "Crane's boys, huh? Been a thorn in the boot of every lawman west of the Divide. I heard he got himself burned up by some rancher." "Something like that," Rourke said. The sheriff looked at the children, then back at Rourke. "You got family?" "No." "You got a plan?" "Working on it." The sheriff grunted. "Well, if it helps, there's an old farmstead about 10 miles east. Abandoned years back. Water runs good. Land ain't cursed." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "Cursed? Just means no one's died on it yet." He nodded. "Sounds like a start." They spent the night in the back room of the saloon, Maeve nestled between them on a borrowed cot, Wesley pressed against the door, still holding that mirror like he expected danger to flash in from the dark. Rourke couldn't sleep. He sat at the window watching the moonlight spill across the dusty street. He thought of Sadra, of Crane, of fire, of loss, but also, for the first time in a long while, of something else. A place where his children might laugh without looking over their shoulders. A stretch of earth unsoiled by blood or fear. A future not inherited but built, one day at a time. He didn't know what it would take to get there, but he knew he'd ride until he found it. The land east of Dry Creek stretched wide and open, with rolling hills and cottonwoods tracing the edges of a winding creek. Rourke, Wesley, and Maeve rode in silence, their shadows long in the late afternoon sun. The weight of the past still clung to them like dust, but there was a different current in the air now, something cautious, something like hope. The farmstead came into view near twilight. A modest structure, sun-bleached and tilting at the corners, sat nestled in a shallow valley. The fences were mostly down and weeds had claimed the fields, but the bones of the place were strong. A well stood near the house, and when Rourke pulled the rope, water rose cool and clear. That alone felt like a blessing. They unpacked slowly. No rush. For once, no need to run. Wesley tended the horses while Maeve explored the perimeter, her small feet leaving tracks through dust and broken grass. Rourke stood in the center of the yard, hat in hand, just breathing. He could feel the quiet like a balm, unfamiliar and sacred. That night, they lit a small fire outside the cabin and cooked what little meat they had. Maeve giggled once when a rabbit darted by, and Rourke saw a piece of her childhood still untouched. Wesley sat with his back against the cabin, hands wrapped around a tin cup, listening to the silence like it was a song he didn't quite trust. But peace is never owed to men like Rourke. Not truly. The next morning, hoofbeats stirred the dirt road. Rourke was already on his feet, rifle slung across his shoulder, scanning the horizon. Dust rose fast. 5 riders, lean and low. Black coats. Red bands tied to their arms. Not just stragglers. These were Crane's blood, what was left of his fire. Wesley ran to the doorway, eyes wide. "They followed us." "No," Rourke muttered. "They hunted us." He knelt beside Maeve. "Inside. Under the floorboards. Don't come out till I say." "But." "No buts." She nodded, trembling, and slipped into the cabin. Rourke turned to Wesley, gripping his shoulder. "This time you don't just watch. You stay with me. You fire if they breach the gate." Wesley didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir." The riders fanned out just beyond the fence line, studying the terrain. The lead man, a wiry figure with a crooked nose and 2 pistols slung low on his hips, called out, "You're the one that lit up Crane?" Rourke didn't answer. He raised the rifle and fired once. The bullet clipped the man's hat clean off. Dust exploded. Silence followed. The riders scattered, taking cover behind trees and shrubs. Wesley ducked beside a water trough, heart pounding so loud he could hardly hear his father's voice. Short bursts. 1 shot, then move. Don't stay in the same place. Gunfire erupted, ripping through the fence and biting into the cabin's outer walls. Rourke moved fast, circling behind the chicken coop, firing at the flash of movement behind a stump. 1 man dropped. Another cursed and fell back. Wesley fired too high. The recoil caught him by surprise. "Again?" Rourke yelled. The boy gritted his teeth and took aim. This time he hit Bark just inches from a rider's shoulder. Close enough to rattle him. Close enough to matter. Then one of the outlaws flanked right, moving fast. Rourke saw it too late. The man burst through the gate and tackled him to the ground. The rifle flew from Rourke's grip. They grappled in the dirt, fists and elbows, breath short and ragged. The outlaw drew a knife, slashing at Rourke's side. The blade bit deep. Rourke roared, slamming his forehead into the man's face. Blood sprayed. The knife clattered to the ground. A shot cracked. The man stiffened and collapsed. Behind him stood Wesley, gun shaking in his hands, eyes locked on the man he had just killed. Rourke gasped, clutching his side, but managed to sit up. "You did what you had to." Wesley didn't speak. He just nodded, eyes burning. Two men remained. From inside the cabin, Maeve screamed. Rourke staggered to his feet, adrenaline pushing pain aside. He limped toward the door just as it burst open. One of the riders had Maeve by the wrist, dragging her out with a pistol to her head. "Drop it," he shouted, "or she dies." Wesley froze, weapon still raised. Rourke stopped dead, breathing hard. "You don't want to do this." "She's just a message," the man growled. "You think killing Crane ends it? That man had a dozen brothers. You lit a fire and now we burn it all." Rourke's fingers twitched toward his belt knife. But he couldn't risk it, not with Maeve so close. Then a whisper cut through the chaos. A whistle. High and sharp. The man blinked, confused. An arrow pierced his throat. He dropped without a sound, Maeve falling free into the dust. From the trees, Sadara emerged. Bow in hand. Blood on her cheek. She didn't stop walking. The last rider tried to flee. He didn't make it 2 steps before another arrow found his back. Silence reclaimed the yard. Maeve ran to Rourke, clinging to his waist. Wesley lowered his gun slowly, breathing in short, shallow bursts. Sadara knelt beside Rourke, pulling his shirt aside. The wound was deep but not fatal. "You followed us," he said, voice ragged. "I wasn't done," she replied. They buried the last of Crane's men behind the barn. No words. Just dirt and memory. That night the fire burned higher. Brighter. Sadara sat beside them, for once not watching the horizon. Maeve fell asleep in Rourke's arms. Wesley sat beside him, closer now, steadier. "You still think surviving ain't noble?" Rourke asked. Sadara didn't answer immediately. She looked at the children. At the firelight on their faces. Then at the stars above. "It is when it looks like this," she said softly. They sat in the silence that followed, not as strangers anymore, but as something closer to kin. The fight was done. The war maybe not. But for now the night held peace. And Rourke knew, this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of one worth telling.